Good morning. Happy Tuesday to you. It is December 8th, and it is a beautiful day outside, and I pray that you're having a great day. Thank you for joining me on today's Bible study as we continue through the book of James, and what a wonderful book this is. I hope that it is going well for you as it is for me. Now, yesterday, I was going back and reviewing some of the video, and for some reason, yesterday's stream seemed really choppy. And I'm not entirely sure if that was my internet connection or what, but I changed a few settings, and so hopefully this won't be as choppy as it was yesterday, and I apologize for that. I probably haven't mentioned this, but I clip out the Bible study portion of this. So after the first 3 to 5 minutes of commentary or whatever, I clip that Bible study portion out, and then I put that in as a audio podcast. So if you go to iTunes or Spotify and look up my name or the Didache, or you could go to our website, christwithinveil.org, and look at the, because at each episode we post this on our christwithinveil.org website. Under there, it gives the link to the podcast. So if you're driving and you can't watch this, you can actually subscribe to the podcast. The downside is that by the time it usually takes 3 hours or 4 hours after I upload it onto iTunes or Spotify before it's actually available. Although it's sooner on Spotify. iTunes takes about a half a day, and Spotify seems to be within, at least so far, within the hour. So that's another way that you can listen to this broadcast. So if you delayed it a day, you could listen to it on a podcast, and you'd only be behind a day. So that is my apology for yesterday, and I will review this again and see if the settings I made fix it. If not, I might have to make more changes. You can always listen to the podcast. I uploaded the video also. We upload the video to YouTube, and YouTube was also choppy. But again, if it was my internet connection yesterday, then it would be choppy on the internet connection. So I'm just doing some investigation. All this incredible technology, and every day is a learning curve. So that's where we are. Also, it appears there's an article today in the New York Times. Pfizer's vaccine offers strong protection after the first dose. Well, that's interesting. So these vaccines, they give you 2 doses. They give you the initial dose, and then you wait probably about 28 days or 4 weeks, and then you get the booster dose. And then after that, you're supposedly protected 95% of the time from this virus. Well, they're saying that if you take this, which by the way, all flu shots are like this. 95% is actually very, very high. When they do the flu shot and you get the flu vaccine, it doesn't mean you're not going to get the flu. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to not get the flu and have some really serious complications or even die from the flu. It just means that you're very, very protected from the flu. And if they can get 70 to 85% of the people in a society protected against the flu, then it can't find paths to transmit to new people, and it basically shuts the flu down. It doesn't go away, it just shuts it down. And you every once in a while see people getting the flu, and you'll see people dying from the flu. But the numbers just dramatically drop when everybody gets the vaccine. So there's no way to prevent every death, unfortunately. It's just we live in a very risky world. If you stay in your house and don't go out and don't eat food or eat food that's only processed a certain way, I mean, there's ways that you can, highly protect yourself from ever having some of these low risk things, but the risk is never zero. So, but it looks like after you have the first dose of this Pfizer vaccine, it is good. And let's see. The coronavirus vaccine made by Pfizer provides strong protection against COVID-19 within about 10 days after the first dose, according to the documents published on Tuesday by the Food and Drug Administration before the meeting of its vaccine advisory group. So that's the group that's going to meet this week, and they'll make a recommendation to, that's an advisory group, and then they'll make a recommendation to the FDA, and then the FDA looks and evaluates that recommendation, and they give the emergency authorization. The finding is one of several significant new results featured in the briefing materials, which include more than 100 pages of data that the two doses of the vaccine had an efficacy rate of 95% after 2 doses administered 3 weeks apart. The new analysis shows that the protection starts kicking in far earlier. What's more, the vaccine worked well regardless of a volunteer's race, weight, or age. And while the trial did not find any serious adverse events caused by the vaccine, many participants did experience aches, fevers, and other side effects. But those are minor side effects to actually getting this whole entire disease or even potentially dying from that disease. So this is all great news. I don't know how many, let's see if it says how many doses are available of this vaccine. The vaccine authorized people, the briefing materials also look. FDA concluded that there was no meaningful imbalances, so that's good. Works in all age groups. Yeah, so this particular article doesn't talk about how many vaccinations are available, but we know, based upon other things, that it's somewhere between 20 and 100 million doses that are going to be available. They're going to be shipped to each of the states, and then the states prioritize within their own state how they want to go. Pretty much every state is going with frontline defenders and nursing home residents as a first pass. I just read that a nursing home, somebody 99 years old just died of COVID. Who was that? George Monson. Davis Monthan Air Force Base is named after the Monson family. And George Monson, who I think is the grandson of the guy that the base is named after, or maybe, I don't know exactly what that is, but somewhere there's a connection, and George Monson, who was 99 years old, died of COVID. So our prayers go out to the Monson family. They are still a family here in the Vail area, well respected, and of course Davis Monthan Air Force Base is named after them. Monson was the first pilot that died in World War I. And he was from Vail, and so the Air Force Base is named after him and Davis. I'm not sure, I don't remember much about Davis, but the Monson family was a family here in the Vail area. And believe it or not, there was a Air Force runway strip. If you take Garrigan's Gulch all the way to the west before you hit Pantano and kind of drive around there, you'll find an old post with I don't know if the light is still on there or not, but that post was there for the Air Force, the strip, the landing strip, because when they first came out with airplanes, then it was completely unregulated. So you could go out in the desert and build your own runway and practice your airplane flying skills. And that was one of the landing strips that was out here in the Vail area. And the post that lighted that landing strip or helped you find that landing strip is still around. So that's pretty cool too. All right, so I think I'll leave it at there. There are no birthdays today. I did look at the Department of Health Services website and looked at deaths. Deaths are increasing. So we are right now at about where we were at about the middle of June as far as deaths go. So the spike actually happened at the July 15th or something like that. Yeah, July 17th was the spike. And that was 103 deaths. And right now we're at about 45 deaths that happened at the spike. That's the most recent spike. So we're at about 50% of where we were in March and April. Have no idea where we're going to be going into this. So I'm very anxious for this vaccine to get out, particularly for people in nursing homes, because I can't even imagine being locked in your room and not even be able to go outside your room, go outside, get sunlight or whatever. And sunlight is probably one of the best things you can do to fight this vaccine, because sunlight turns into vitamin D, and vitamin D, if you fill your vitamin D reserves in your body, does an amazing job of repelling this vaccine. So, all right. So I think that's enough with that. We're gonna talk about James today, and this is probably one of the most interesting and fascinating and thought-provoking parts of James. So we're just gonna go ahead and get into it. So we are in the book of James, and we're going to start in James chapter 1, verse 13, and I think I'll just read verses 13 through 15. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. And then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. So, we've been talking about trials and temptations, and the Greek word for that is parasmus, and it means a trial or a test or a temptation. And that's the same word used here when trial or tested or temptation. And we've been talking earlier about how God allows these trials and tests and temptation, and how when he walks beside us through these trials, tests, and temptation, we grow in our faith. But now James says when we're tempted, we shouldn't say, God is tempting me. Now, we just said earlier in James that God is walking through us in the trial and he's walking through us in the temptation. So how it almost seems like a disconnect to say, well, when that happens, we shouldn't say God is doing that. Well, a couple things to point out. First of all, notice the first word there. When tempted, no one should say God is tempting me. It's not like the temptations is not if we're tempted. It is when we are tempted. Because temptations happen in our life, or trials and tribulations happen in our life. They're gonna happen. But the other thing I want to notice here, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So it's not explicitly said here, but this temptation that we're talking about is a temptation to do evil. And that is a different temptation or parasmus or trial that exists because God is molding us and shaping us into the person that he wants to be. There's two different things going on here. Although the same Greek word is used and the same meaning is behind each Greek word, there's two different concepts going on here. We have in our church, Christ Lutheran Vale, an analogy of a tree that says God plants the seed and it gets in fertile soil, and that seed sprouts and it pops up out of the surface and it turns into a sprout. And then when it's a sprout, we surround that sprout with other Christians, followers of Jesus, to help water and nurture that sprout until it gets strong enough to be on its own. And then it continues growing for the rest of its life, and it starts bearing fruit, and the fruit is good. So that's actually, I have a picture of that image here somewhere. It's right here. If you're watching online, there's a picture of a tree, and underneath the soil you can see the roots, and above the soil you can see a strong tree trunk, and then on the tree trunk there's leaves and there's fruit. And that is our image for what a Christian is. Because the bigger the soil, or the bigger the root that's in the soil, the stronger the tree. The two go hand in hand. You can't have a strong tree without a strong root system. And if you have a strong root system, the tree will survive even if the tree gets massively damaged above the soil. It's amazing. Sometimes I walk all the time, and I'll see on my walks trees where you can see that the soil has come away, but this root system is still strong. Or you might see a tree struck by lightning and half the tree gets ripped away, and yet the tree is still living and still bearing fruit and all that sort of thing. So that's the image of what we have. So the way I want to talk about trials and tribulations, these parasmoses, is there's two things that can influence this tree. The first is God, as the master gardener, can come in and prune the tree. There are people, I know there's at least one person listening this morning that loves to prune trees. Maybe even prune them down to the root. I don't know. But that's healthy. In the wintertime, right now, my grapes are pretty much dead. But before they grow again in the spring, I need to get out there and I need to cut out all the dead branches and just get that system to the very basic part, so that when the spring happens, they're healthy trees. The same thing is true with trees. that there are times in life when the gardener needs to come in and just prune those trees and get them back. And when that's done, when the tree comes back, it's stronger than ever. It bears better fruit. The quality of the tree is better. And it may look, when you're doing that to a tree, that it is horribly damaging, but it's not. It's actually healthy for the tree. And so that kind of pruning, those kind of trials and tribulations are very, very welcome. And we should praise God that he does that to us. It's the same thing as the potter molding us and shaping us to be the beautiful pot that he wants us to be. Or in another analogy is gold. And the gold gets put in the fire and all the dross gets burned out until it's pure gold. That kind of pruning, that kind of pottery work, that kind of refining is good for us. And all that works towards God's plan, and it is a wonderful thing. On the other hand, there are times when we will pour on our root system or pour on our trees poison. We'll pour Roundup on our tree. It's foreign substance that gets into the tree and gets into the root system. Now, if you're a healthy tree, that Roundup will not kill you. But if you start to pour that Roundup over and over and over again into the soil, even the healthiest of trees cannot fight against a massive amount of Roundup that goes into the soil. So the same thing is true with evil. Remember what we're talking about here. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone with evil. That's how I kind of read that. We just finished a long Bible study on the Didache. And in the Didache, we talked about two ways of life. There's the way of life, which is peace, joy, happiness, love, sharing, caring, turning the other cheek, all that kind of stuff. And then there's a way of death. And the way of death is licentiousness and adultery and murder and all the things listed in the Didache, or the things of the Ten Commandments that are prompting the Didache. All these types of things, slanderous words, living as an evil person in the world, all that kind of stuff is the way of death. It's like Roundup being put on your root system. That is not healthy. That stuff, a strong tree can fight against it, but if there is enough Roundup being placed on the tree or in the soil, even the strongest of trees cannot fight against it, and eventually it can kill the tree. And that is not good. And God does not do that. God does not place the Roundup or the evil on our root system or in our trees. The evil comes from us. From us. Listen again to what James says in verse 14. But each person is tempted when they're dragged away by their own evil desire and they're enticed. And then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. So this Roundup isn't something that's just poured on you. It's a little Roundup, and the tree's like, I can deal with this kind of Roundup, and so that's okay. And so you say, well, I'll pour some more Roundup, and pour some more Roundup. It's like the frog in the pot, and you turn the water on a slow temperature, and you slowly, slowly, slowly raise the temperature, and the frog doesn't jump out of the pot, and the frog gets killed. That's apparently, if you want to boil a frog, that's how you do it, right? You don't just put a frog in boiling water because it immediately jumps out. You have to put the frog in temperature. I've never boiled a frog before, so I'm just going with this. But you have to put it in a low temperature, then you slowly increase the heat, and the frog doesn't even realize that it's being killed. Well, the same thing is with this temptation. It's a little bit, and then it's a little bit, then it turns into desire, and then desire turns into sin, and then sin turns into death. And that's how you kill a tree. You don't just pour a bunch of Roundup on it. Well, that's how you kill a frog. You basically just pour a little bit by a little bit, and it gets worse and worse and worse until it finally kills the tree. Which is why we should avoid evil at all costs. Why we should train ourselves to avoid evil at all costs. because evil continues to grow and to grow and to grow until it can kill us. So what's a practical example of this? Maybe I call this the vortex, that it begins to spin and then it gets out of control. If you have an addiction, let's say that I'll take a benign addiction to, because anything can be addictive, but I'll just say gambling. I just saw yesterday a guy, it was a short thing that I saw of a guy who lost $5,000 from gambling, and he just freaked out. I don't gamble. I do actually gamble a little bit without money. But anyway, and I have gone to, I turned 21 at a casino. Or did I turn 18 at a casino? I turned 8. How old was I? I turned one of those ages at a casino. My parents took me. I think it was 21. We went to Las Vegas and I played blackjack at a $5 blackjack table. And it was fun entertainment. I think the whole evening cost $15 or something like that. It was entertainment. But for some people, they can't handle it. They do it over and over. They like the thrill of the win or loss. And so they go back again and again. Of course, now there's online gambling that there are people that are losing money hand over fist because they can't control themselves. And eventually it could destroy them. And you never know if you have an addictive personality in that area or not. And so you have to be very, very careful. If you know there are things out there that could lead you down to a path that could destroy you, you could do one of two things. One is you could have somebody with you to see if this is something that's going to destroy you or not. And if it doesn't destroy you, then great. But if it does destroy you, you need somebody in your life that pulls you back from the brink and says, hey, this type of behavior is destroying you. You do not want to continue in this type of behavior. And that's the problem with the world around us, is that there are so many things in the world around us that are in low doses. They're benign. Alcohol. Jesus' first thing was at a wedding in Cana. He made wine. So wine is a good thing. We know that wine has in it antioxidants that are very healthy for you. And one of the ways to keep yourself healthy is to have antioxidants. There is certainly nothing wrong with, the early church did this, Jesus did this, with having a glass of wine. But if it becomes addictive for you, it can throw you down into the pit. Now, the interesting thing is that wine by itself, particularly the wine that they had in the New Testament, wasn't as strong as the wines we create today. We've created technologies to create wines that are a lot more potent than they ever were in the early church. And then we've created alcohols that are very, very strong, that are very, very, very dangerous. And we know that they're dangerous. And so in the 1800s, there was a strong push by the church to say, don't even go down this path, because some of these things are so addictive, you can't control it. And that is so true. There are some of these things. Now, there are some people that are perfectly fine having a glass of wine, but there are other people that, for whatever reason, the glass of wine turns into the bottle of wine that turns into a couple of bottles of wine. And that type of behavior will destroy you. And it's not the wine. It's our own evil desires. It's us. It's us allowing that sort of poison to go deep into the soil. If it's just a social thing that's an enjoyment thing and you do it and it doesn't drive you to an addiction, then it's okay. But if you have a personality, if you're not connected with other people, if you have not built the ability to refrain from the temptation of going farther in any of these addictions, then they can destroy you. They can be poison to you. And anything that can lead to that is a huge temptation that can destroy you. God would say, just don't let any of these temptations happen. Don't let your desires be fulfilled till it gets to death. And there are a lot of desires and temptations out there. And God is not behind any of them. God does not tempt you with these evil desires. That's Satan that is tempting you with evil desires. And Satan will come in like a fox. He'll come in like a roaring lion. He'll come in a sheep, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And he'll try to show you that, hey, this isn't that bad. This is not a bad thing at all. And if you're surrounded by people who love you and you are able to resist these temptations, they don't go any further, then they don't lead you down into the path. But Satan is a tricky guy. And he wants to take anything that is good and turn it into something that is evil. As a matter of fact, that's what the whole 10 Commandments is all about. It's taking something good and Satan twisting it and turning it into something that's bad, bad, bad until it finally kills you. At least the first commandment, have no other gods before me. The reason why that God said, have no other gods before me, is because we can take other things in our life that are good, that are very good, and place them in a higher position than God in our life. And then they control every decision that we have, as opposed to God controlling every decision we have. And when that happens, that thing can become evil in our life. It can become poison in our life. Even a good thing can become poison in our life if we place it at a higher level than God in our life. If God is the primary force in our life, then all things kind of work for good. But if you put something else in the primary position over God in your life, it will destroy you. It will kill you. It will be, eventually, it could be the poison that destroys the tree in your life. And that's not God's doing. That's our doing. We do it when we're tempted and we're enticed, and then the desire is enticed, and then desire conceives, and it gives birth to sin, and then sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death, and it can kill us. It's what I call this vortex or this spiral. And at the top end, it may not seem like it's a big deal, but over time, it can spiral and it can turn to death. That's why it is so important to resist every temptation. That's why it's so important, if you have a grievance with somebody, a family member, that you go and you talk to that family member. Now, is it going to turn into a spiral of death? No. It may be lost and forgotten, and you may be able to go on forward with your life not being angry at this family member or your spouse or your children. But if you do not confront it, if you do not deal with any of these types of sins, it can spiral slowly at first. It's like the outside of that coin funnel that just goes around the coin funnel. But eventually there's enough energy that it can spiral down and destroy you. This is why it's so, and I've seen this in my own life. I remember in high school being very angry with my mother, and it was not going anywhere. I was trenching in my heels. She was trenching in her heels, and this thing was spiraling out of control. And my dad saw it, and he came and he talked to me. He says, this thing is spiraling out of control. You need to deal with it. You have to do Matthew 18 and go and talk and discuss. And we did, and it didn't spiral out of control. It stopped it in its tracks. But I often wonder if my father hadn't, because I'm a pretty proud person. It may not seem like it, but I'm a pretty proud person. If I didn't have intervention from somebody to see what was going on and to tell me what was going on, I wonder how far out of control it could have gotten and where would it have been. And I can almost guarantee that there are people listening to this, or of situations where it got out of control and it's led to death. And God doesn't do that. God is not the source of this. Satan is the source of this. So you should never say when you're tempted that God is doing the temptation. Now, it is okay if God is pruning to say God is doing the pruning. That is perfectly fine, because God does prune. God allows things to happen in your life which force you to dig deep, to grow your roots, to call upon God and His Holy Spirit to help you grow in your life. And He will be there, and He'll walk beside you, and He'll carry you through that thing. And then through that, you become the beautiful tree, the healthy tree, the beautiful pot, the refined gold that He wants you to be. But on the other side, the poison, He's not in charge of that at all. And that can give birth to death. He is the author of life, not the author of death. So I think we'll end it there. Thanks for joining me today. Let's close with prayer. Dear God, continue to prune me and grow me so that I may be the tree that you want me to be. But God, when other temptations arise that are poison for me, help me resist them through your Spirit. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so that's the end of this. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. I will go back and see if this worked, if it was choppy again, and if not, that's great. But may you have a blessed day, and we will see you later. Thanks.